Hey everybody, this is Danny Echevarria with theproaudiofiles.com, coming to you from a new space. If you're familiar with my other videos, you probably recognize this is a different room than what I've been in the past, and it's actually going to change a lot, probably in the semi-near future, but that's for another time. In this video, I want to talk about 3 tips for getting a fatter kick drum sound using clipping. And there's actually a great article on clipping by Matthew Weiss on the Pro Audiophiles website that provides some context on not just clipping in general as a phenomenon, but also clipping in the context of pop music and how it became such a commonly heard sound. So for more information, I highly recommend that. Check it out. But in a nutshell, for those of you who are not familiar, clipping is essentially a type of distortion that occurs when a signal exceeds the maximum in a given context. So you maybe have encountered clipping in the digital context, like in your DAW, like if you have a channel that exceeds 0 dB, then you heard some digital clipping, which is usually pretty ugly sounding. And in general, uncontrolled clipping does not sound great. But controlled clipping can sound pretty cool. And kick drum is a great place to use it. And I'm going to do some actually pretty crude clipping in this song in a controlled way that is going to contribute to getting a fatter kick drum sound. And I'm going to talk about what I do to help get the most out of that. But before I get into the nitty gritty, let's just hear the song. This is a track that I mixed recently by my good friend Max Foreman. Check it out.
You can walk along the beach on the silver sea, but the circle winds around just the same. You can roll downhill, it's a bitter pill when the...
Okay, so let's look at this kick. And for some context, by the way, I'm using the Kazrog K-Clip 3. And real quick, I'm just going to crank the input gain of this so you can hear what it does, and then back it down to where I have it. And just to sort of give you some context of how clipping is going to transform the sound of this kick.
You can walk along...
Let me solo it. So it's a pretty dramatic change, and it sounds a lot louder as you drive it up, but it is not actually getting any louder because that's by the nature of clipping. I've got the output set at -12, which means that's a hard ceiling. It's not getting louder than -12, but the perceived loudness increases a lot, which kind of illustrates what is so appealing about clipping in general. But rather than just driving the clipper real hard, I'm going to construct a chain that's going to help me get the most out of a slightly more subtle but still kind of crude level of clipping. And all of this, by the way, brings me to my first tip for using clipping in this way, which is to use it in parallel. What I'm going to end up with is going to be a pretty dramatically changed version of the kick that I started with. And using clipping like this might be a cool way to design a new kick sound for yourself, or it might be a way to make your client get really mad at you for destroying the kick drum sound that they had that they really liked. So a good way to get the best of both worlds is to dial it up really extreme, but then use it in parallel. And in this case, I have a stereo drum mix of everything you can hear here. And so that original stereo drum mix is going to preserve the transients of the original kick because we're really going to lose the transients as we go through with this. It's going to preserve the dynamics, and we're going to lose the dynamics too. And we can kind of meld the two to get a kick sound that would be stronger than either one alone. So use it in parallel. That's the first tip. Second tip is, for best results, I like to start with some dynamic sculpting. And in this case, the first thing that I'm going to do is put a gate on it. And the point of this gate is to shorten the kick down to the length of a 16th note in the song, which is 167 milliseconds. I looked that up. You can look it up too. And in this case, the kick in this song is actually pretty punchy already, but especially if you have a really like long sustained kick, things can get really hairy and you can end up with some really uncontrolled low end if you start like really driving a long sustainy kick. And so using gate like this is a great way to get a musically tightened kick sound as your like source material starting point to feed into the clipper. And so I like to use the side chain to tighten it up. I'm going to show you how I dial it. I'm just going to play it back and sweep it up so that I'm just only getting the attack. And that's not what we're going to stick with. It's just what is going to be triggering the gate to open. So you can see on the metering there that the attack is very short, and so it makes it so that the sustain of the kick doesn't keep the gate open too long. And because my release is timed so musically to the song, it means that I'm just going to get this very sort of musical little nugget out of this kick. And it's going to be subtle, but it has the potential to change how this whole chain is going to work by a lot. So real quick, A, B, before and after. So it's a little tighter, and it's just the starting point. The next thing I'm going to do is some compression. And in this case, this is a Kush Novatron. I'm doing some intense compression on a high ratio setting, release time to the song again, and a fast attack, which is going to bring out the sustain in a way that is really going to help things down the line. But it's going to leave this very short but aggressive little attack that will also kind of keep some snap in the kick, which will be nice as we eventually hit the clipper, which is going to take some of that snap away. So I'm actually going to, just to show you how that sounds, I'm going to start with the attack all the way slow and dial it back to where I have it, and you can hear how it transforms. So you get this really tight, short attack out of that, which is going to be nice when we hit that clipper. And by the way, I had to adjust the output gain down pretty dramatically in order to get this to gain match where the starting point was. So just FYI, something to be aware of. And then third in this dynamics chain is some saturation via Soundtoys Decapitator. And this is basically just going to accentuate everything else that I did. Saturation sort of has that effect of just kind of making everything more noticeable about a sound. And it's also going to start to thicken things up and add some harmonics that are going to make this kick pop in the mix, which is cool because we're eliminating the transient, which is the other thing that would make it pop in a dense mix. I'm going to start with this just dialed all the way down and then bring it up to where I had it, and you can hear what it adds. Okay, so that's starting to change a lot. And then here, I've had the clipper bypass, but here's how it all sounds together. So remember, this is where we started. So this is why we're using this in parallel. This is really transforming this kick sound. So this brings me to my third tip, which is that I like to feed a clipper a little bit of extra low end when I'm using it on a kick like this. And in this case, I'm going to be using this UAD Pultec emulation. There are lots of emulations of this legendary EQ. The Waves Pugue Tech is another great one. And a sort of classic Pultec trick with the low end in particular is to boost and attenuate at the same time, which still gives you the boost, but it does it in a controlled way that ends up being cleaner. It can be kind of magical sometimes. And so in this case, I've got the frequency set at 60 hertz, which is like the closest to the fundamental of this kick. And I'm going to keep the clipper on. I'm going to play back as I dial up this boost, and you can hear how it affects this kick sound. The idea here is that the clipper is going to be adding harmonics onto whatever we feed into it. And so at this point, we have this sort of controlled kick signal, but I want it to have this robust low end. So I want to be feeding that robust low end into the clipper. So here's how that sounds. So one more time, quick A/B. I'm going to mute it and then bring it in. So not only does it add the low end weight that you can feel, but because it's getting so many added harmonics in the clipper, you can also really hear it. And if you were just going to add a ton of low end to a kick that was not so tightly controlled, you might end up with kind of a mess. But in this case, because we've already done this cleanup work, it ends up coming through just strong and tight, which is what we were looking for. And then if I were going to add, this is like tip 3B, is be prepared to do a little bit of low end cleanup on the back end of this whole thing. And in my chain, I've got the FabFilter Pro Q. You can see I've got a high pass set at 40 Hertz. This is just cutting off all the rumble below the fundamental because again, I'm looking for focus here. I'm not looking for like crazy floppy low end. I want tight, powerful low end. And I ended up doing some boosting in the low mids around 300 to bring out those harmonics a little more. I don't often boost 300 on a kick, but on this, it sounded good. So here's how that whole chain sounds together. And just as a refresher, here was the starting point. And now we've got everything all dialed. Let's bring this into the mix. I'm going to turn it all the way down and play this chorus back and just bring the volume fader back up, and you can hear what it adds as I do.
You can walk along the beach on the silver sea, but the circle winds around just the same. You can roll downhill, it's a bit.
So remember what that kick sounded like soloed. Like, it didn't sound like the kick that we started with, but as I added in, it's just sort of beefing up the kick in this way that I really like. And I actually have it much higher right now than I did in the actual finished mix, but I want you to be able to hear it. Here's one last quick A/B. I'm just going to mute it and then drop it back in. You can hear what the difference that this kick makes in the mix.
You can walk along the beach on the silver sea, but the circle winds around just the same. You can roll down.
So a lot of power. It is maybe not in the most overt way, but in a way that is both, you can both feel from the low end and hear from the harmonics above. It's a fatter kick. Okay, so that's it. If you have any cool clipping tricks with kicks or otherwise, let me know about them in the comments. Let's keep this conversation going. Until next time, once again, I am Danny Echevarria with theproaudiofiles.com. Thanks for watching. And by the way, if you'd like to get your mixes critiqued by none other than yours truly, that's a feature that we offer to members on the Pro Audiophiles website right now. So go check that out. It's been very cool to see what you all are up to and to get to interact with people from the community. So highly recommend. Until next time, happy mixing. Peace.